So that's what we need for add the CSS class, and then we'll implement the one for removing a CSS class. Again, we'll pass in the control and a class name. And to make this happen, what we'll do is we'll take a look at the CSS class names that are already applied to this control. We'll split them based off of the space and then basically build the list back up again, add them back in, but skipping the one that we're passing in. So in effect, we're removing it. So we'll declare a variable, and this is the same line that we've had up here before. So let's go ahead and just copy this instead of typing it up. And then from there, what we'll do is split the classes out and add that into a variable. So splitting on space. So then what we'll do is loop through the array of classes. Oops. Okay, so we'll look at the current one that we're on. So class is I. If that doesn't equal the class name, we need one more variable here. So we have basically the list that we're going to be building up. Initialize that as a blank string, and then what we can do is use that to append together the one we're looking at. Okay, and then we're going to separate it with a space so that everything works together. Now once we have that list, we'll find our control and we'll say class name equals CSS class, and then we've implemented the remove CSS class functionality. Okay, so now that we have those utility functions available, what we can do is go in and start implementing specific for our title editor. So what we want to do is make sure that when we do our Ajax call, we're only making the call if things have changed. So let's create a variable called old val. And so what we'll do is before we do any edits, we'll set aside what the old value was, and then we can take a look at that before we make our Ajax call to make sure that something has in fact changed before we try to call back to the server. So the next thing we need is our focus function. If you remember down here, we created all of these different JavaScript function pointers, and so we need to implement the one that runs when you focus on the text box. So function txt title focus. And what we're doing here is basically we're going to find a reference to the control, and just on focus, all we're doing is setting aside the old value. So we can declare a variable, call it control, and then we're going to use the Infragistics client-side object model in order to get reference to this control, because the control is actually a composite control. It's not just the input text box, the HTML input text box. There's some other surrounding code that gives it the rich functionality of what it is. So we need to use this special function. So it's igEdit underscore get by ID. And what we need to do is chase after the correct client ID. We don't want to just use the ID we put in the code behind. We need to see what it's generating up to the HTML. So to do that, we'll just create this expression and do txt title client ID. So once we have that, what we can do is grab our old val variable here and just do control.getValue, and that will set aside the original value when people go in and focus on the control. The next one that we need to do is the function that runs when they click. And basically at this point, we're not doing much more except for changing the style sheet. So once again, we want to get reference to our control. And then we're simply going to remove CSS class from this control, and we're taking out the live input. And we're going to add in the live input edit class. So basically, when it goes into edit mode, we're going to apply that dashed border around it so people get an idea that you're in an edit mode. And finally, the last function to implement, and really where most of the work is done, is the event method for the blur events. So let's call this function txt title underscore blur. And we'll get reference to our control once again. And we'll also create a new variable. We'll just call this val, and then do a control get value from here. So now what we're doing is once we blur on this text box, the idea is that someone's made some changes so we can go in and get the latest value. Once we have that latest value, we'll do something with it, but we'll also update the UI before we do anything else, just to make sure that we're representing a dirty state. So we'll do add CSS class, and we'll stick this back into live input. And we're going to remove the edit class. Now this might seem a little weird at this point because we haven't really done anything, and with these two lines here, we've basically reverted the screen back to an unaltered state. And that's because the next line of code that I'm going to write is going to look and see if there really have been any changes done. So if val does not equal old val, then we're going to do something. So basically, if they are equal, then no changes have been made, and we don't need to update the UI to show that we're doing any sort of backend processing. So we're kind of preemptively getting ready for whether or not we need to make any changes. So if we're inside this if block here, then basically changes have been made and we need to do something. So the first thing that we'll do is kick off our request to the code behind in order to make the changes. So we're going to call page methods, and what that does is it's a container for the proxies that have been created for the server methods that we have that have been marked as being exposed to Ajax. So we'll call page methods and then update title. Now this is pointing to a method we haven't implemented on the server yet, but we'll get to that in just a moment. From here we'll do a $get, and what this will allow us to do is get into the value of the item that's in our hidden HTML control, and this is the primary key value, so that we're able to find the exact record immediately. We'll reach in and get the value out of here, and then we're going to pass in the val. So this is the val is the new title. And then we want to point to some functions of what to run, whether there's a success or failure. So we'll do title success, and then we'll just call this one fail, because we'll reuse it. Okay. Once that's been started, then we'll update the UI, and we will remove the CSS class from the control live input, and we'll add the CSS class live input dirty. So at this point, we've made an asynchronous callback to the server, and we've updated the UI to show that it's in a waiting dirty state. And when things start to happen, it'll call back to the server, and it'll run one of two functions. It will either run the title success or the fail function.